Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is an NPC bodybuilder and coach. Today's guest is Austin Stout. Austin, welcome back to the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on for round two.
For sure. So, Austin, we have a lot of catching up to do. I can't remember the last time that you were on. It was maybe, I don't know, last spring or summer, something like that. But the first topic I want to kind of get into is your performance at NPC Nationals this past December. I followed along in terms of your progress pics on Facebook and Instagram. From my perspective, you brought a great package, but I want to kind of get your thoughts, your perspective. So just walk us through, starting with your own personal prep. How did it go compared to other preps? What were maybe some differences from previous preps, some things that maybe you tried or implemented, and then just walk us through actually in terms of like competition day at NAC.
Sure, yeah. So the prep was never, the prep wasn't originally planned. It was just kind of a situation where I knew that I was heading towards that national show. I wasn't exactly sure when, but I was in the midst of kind of a leaning cleanup phase, getting some body fat off after my off season had been pretty long. So last time I competed was 2019 in at Junior USA, and then I did a regional show also that year. And I kind of got to a point where some people, were giving me some feedback and this and that. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to pull the trigger on this and go ahead and do it. So as you know, I did have two other clients at the show. So I'm like, well, I'm already going to be there. So the national show that I'm going to do is probably going to be this one because I'm already traveling there. All I have to do is pay for the tan and the entry, right? Because I'm already prepping. So I did. It was called the Midwest Gladiator. That was my qualifier. It was in Chicago. And then and then obviously NPC Nationals was in Orlando. So one of the things that was kind of different, I suppose, with this prep, and I don't know that I would necessarily call it different, but the fact that it wasn't planned, which is an uncommon thing. I think people, there are situations where people are losing body fat and decide to turn it into a prep. I do that with clients a lot. That's not uncommon. It's just this period ended up being really long, right? Because I had started this deficit phase so early in the year, in probably February, right? And then with nationals being in December, that's a really long period of time. Now I will say that the first 4 or 5 months of it were pretty slow. I wasn't doing anything too crazy. I had lots of refeeds and diet breaks and things in there. It wasn't anything too extreme. And then kind of really picked up the pace on that around probably, you know, three months out from the show or so. And I was already in pretty good shape by that point. So it was really just a matter of, picking my qualifier show in a good time frame and getting everything lined up. Now the differences were obviously I was bigger than the previous show, which is always the goal, right? It'd been a really long, brutal, productive off season, lots of food, lots of hard training. And I I added, it's hard to kind of quantify because I was a little bit tighter this time. So I would venture to say I probably added 10 pounds on stage weight. If we're factoring in extra body fat being lost. And I came in and actually weighed in at nationals at 198.1, and the cutoff I think is 198.2. So there was, I was right at the top of the class and just about as good a condition as I think I could ever even make this body produce for me. So, man, the last the last 2 3 months of prep were extremely tough mentally, physically, just because I was lean for so long and high workload, managing stress, making sure that I'm servicing my clients to the best of my ability, making sure that no one, my thing too with coaching, and it's a business, right? And I treat it like a career and like a business. So I can't expect my clients to suffer because I am, you know, choosing to prep. It would be like if you worked a corporate job and you told your boss that your sales are gonna drop because you are prepping for a show, but they're gonna boot you out the door, right? Yeah, it doesn't work like that. So I treat this the same way. So probably one of the most difficult things was just like keeping my personal level of cervix and ethical performance up during those later phases of the prep. Um, that takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of structure. It takes a lot of just making sure that you are very diligent with your scheduling, very diligent with, staying on top of things with people. And I luckily have a lot of experience doing that. So that wasn't overly, overly abnormal for me. It didn't really break me from my routine. It's just I was 10 times as tired doing the same things that I was already doing. Uh, Anyone that's followed me in preps before, I'm notoriously have to get to very low calories and lots of activity, lots of cardio, points of like sub 1500 calories, 1400 calories in that range, and 1 2 hours of cardio a day. And for someone that's, you know like stage lean at 200 pounds or more, it's not much. It's not much to go by, you know. So it was very difficult. I was happy, but I was very happy with the package that I brought. And I think that some things that probably differed towards the end of the prep was I did some different things peaking wise this time. Peaking for one show, when my regional show, I was very lean, but I probably was still a couple percent leaner for nationals. So, every time you get a little bit leaner, that peak's going to vary a little bit in terms of, how sensitive you are to carbohydrate and fats and fluid and electrolytes. And by the time I got to nationals, it took a good amount of food to fill me out throughout, over the course of an entire week, really like slowly feeding in and reducing activity to get me like completely full. I was in this perpetually flat state for, for 2 or 3 months. So it took quite a bit for me to get there. But finally by stage day brought it all together. I think for me, and at national shows, you also have to people also have to understand, if they haven't done them, that the size of the people you're competing against is going to be different. So you have to understand like where your physique fits into that mold. I was not going to be the biggest person in the class, so I have to leverage what my strengths are within that division, which is shape, which is, making sure my muscle bellies are full enough, but also keeping that ultra dry, ultra hard look. And, I could have one person may have said, well, you can just go for fuller, but that would have not placed me better necessarily, because I would have lost my edge that I had to stand out in the lineup. So I think, all things considered, I had the best balance of every, all worlds that I could get there.
Okay. Now, before we actually talk about competition day, I want to ask you, were there any hiccups or setbacks in terms of maybe your body not responding, or something with your gut, or anything like physically is kind of what I'm referring to? Because you already mentioned the workload and managing stress and things like that. That's kind of a given, right, with your profession. But anything in terms of your body not responding or anything like that, in terms of hiccups in the prep, or was it generally speaking pretty smooth, Austin?
The low calories is kind of goes hand in hand with my body notoriously not responding, right? It's just the fact that it takes so much push to get where I need to be. I've done a lot of different methods in terms of, you know, the very low calories with larger refeeding, with smaller refeeding. I've kind of settled on this in the last couple preps where I will refeed slightly more frequently with a little bit less food. And I do this something similar with clients where I think that it's important to understand the merit of a refeed and also stress reduction. So not only giving someone more food, but also reducing activity load during those refeeding periods. So you get kind of the best of both worlds of you get, the carbohydrate, and you also get the stress reduction and inflammation reduction from maybe not having them pound so much cardio that day, or maybe refeed on a day that you're not training at all, perhaps, things like that. So those are things that help me. And I did have some hiccups. I mean, there were days where, of course, just accumulated stress from just beating myself up so much, digestion's never going to be perfect towards the end with something like that. I did have a hiccup going into the first show where I had some kind of stomach bug, like the morning I woke up where I was flying out to the show. And so I had to scramble to make weight because I was like 6 or 7 pounds over the day before waking up. And of course, regional shows, they generally weigh you in the evening time or afternoon time. So that was kind of that was not the most fun thing. A lot just fasting, essentially, like not even, not being able to eat. And which at that point didn't bother me a whole lot. The fatigue is what really gets you at that point. But going into nationals, it was much of the same process, just a little more fine tuned because I was leaner and I had that trial run for the regional show. I didn't really have any issues making weight or peaking for nationals. I would say that it just took more of more food, leaving water in, like not really pulling water a whole lot just because of how lean and dry, how lean and dry I was. No real issues with travel or anything. I would much prefer to just drive to like a couple hours versus fly, but you're kind of limited when it comes to those shows. So
Hmm.
you do what you got to do.
Right. Okay. Now, why don't you walk us through a little bit? We don't have to get too crazy in depth, but I do want to get your thoughts on, like show day. So, from my remembrance, correct me if I'm wrong, from having other competitors on the podcast, ladies went all Friday, and then you guys went all Saturday. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
Yes. And again, people that haven't done these levels of shows. So I had done junior show before, which is slightly smaller, but not a lot smaller. The only thing really smaller at the junior shows was the bodybuilding division. The classic physique and bikini and all that, they had pro cards. So I mean, it was just as big as everywhere else. It's just the fact that everything's very slow. It's like wait, 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 and then you better be ready to go like right when it's your turn type of thing, because they're going to leave you in the back. They don't care. They're not, you know what I mean? Like you're going to get left behind. You're not going to know when to pump up. All these things. And they're going to line you up and you're going to stand there for 30 minutes in line while you wait for the middleweight division that had 30 guys in it. Right. So those things are different. I think people kind of, they don't realize the amount of time that you're going to spend there on show day. It's not a local show where they're just like bam out, right? So those things are play into how you peak and pump up and all that quite a bit. So yeah, all women went Friday, and then all the men went Saturday. I think they started at 8 a.m. I probably got off stage at bodybuilding went first. I probably got off stage at, I don't know, noon. I mean, it took 3 or 4 hours at least just to get through bodybuilding classes. And they still had other divisions, going after that. I think that especially once you start to get past about middleweight, once you get to about middleweight, the divisions get really big,
Yeah.
right? Middleweight's huge. Light heavy's like light heavy and heavy are probably going to be the toughest classes, like overall in terms of depth, a lot of the time, because that's where like an average of where everyone kind of falls. So light heavy class, I think, had like so 23 or 27, something like that. We're talking 3, 4 call outs in most of the divisions. And there's a individual, right? Then there's a comparison, a random comparison at the beginning. Then they do the call out. So like you're posing a lot too. Um, people fade and they can't hold poses and all those things. So I would say another thing is I practice posing more this prep than I've ever practiced posing my entire, you know, 13, 14 years of competing. I work with Kenny Wallach. Him and I are good friends, and I've worked with him in the past, but I mean, he was just drilling me and belittling me for about 4 months telling me how terrible I was doing and everything. And just getting those things down, and also learning extra tweaks, because as your physique develops, your poses may change a little bit in terms of like how you can best display certain things. So in 3 years, I had to make some adjustments on the way that I hit poses versus, last year.
Mm.
So that was a huge asset to me, was all the repetitive posing practice when I was dead ass tired and just wanted to take a nap. But that stuff pays off.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think a lot of that, having a posing coach, and it goes back to doing the little things, right? And that attention to detail in any aspect of life, but especially in bodybuilding, when you start getting on that higher national stage, that attention to detail is what it's the separator, right? I mean, you were talking about guys that can't, get into their poses, they're not posing correctly. Like, the judges are going to take those guys and just, I mean, unless they're, a Phil Heath type, once in a 20-year type of a
Boot you right out.
physique, they're going to take those guys that aren't doing the little things at those national level competitions, and just, they're going to dock them and set them to the side. I mean, that's pretty fair to say, right?
Oh, absolutely. And you're talking very small degree of separation. And granted, differences in physiques, like my physique's different than someone else's and so on, but the degree of separation between how good people are is so small that you better be, ready to go. So if not, you're going to be in that third or fourth call out, even if you have a good physique. And there's plenty of stories of that. You can ask tons of people that do their first national shows, and they don't even hardly get looked at. They just get kind of pushed off to the side.
Right, right. Okay, now, what were your overall thoughts and takeaway from your performance at nationals? Again, you got seventh in the light heavies. Just talk about your thoughts, your takeaways from nationals. Like, give yourself a little bit of credit, or not, in this moment. I think you would be probably pretty satisfied with the package you brought to stage. What do you say, Austin?
Yeah, it's being a judge sport. I knew what my strengths were, and they varied from other people in the class. They had 6 in the first call out. Would have loved to grab that one little spot, get in that first call out, and kind of been compared to those guys. Looking at that first call out, I would have compared really favorably to probably 3 through 6. One was a lock. The guy that won the class kind of blew everyone away. He was looked like Brandon Curry, but about 2 inches shorter. But I would have compared favorably to the rest of that first call out. So when your strengths, again, mine being that like ultra peeled condition, vary from other people, one of two things is going to happen. They're going to put you right up in the front because you're so much different, or they're going to not put you in the front because you're so much different, you know. And I think that looking at that first call out, there was a theme in that call out, which was they weren't the leanest guys in the class. They were in very good condition, but the top 6 weren't the top 6 leanest guys necessarily in the class, right? They were the top 6 biggest guys in the class, you know. And I was kind of watching the prejudging develop, and it was like when they got the bantam weights, and and then they went lights and welters and middles, and I'm like, man, they're really favoring conditioning. But then when they got to like light, heavy, heavy, and supers, they're like size, 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 size. And had, woulda, shoulda, coulda. I mean, had they kind of stayed on that path of judging, I definitely would have probably been in that first call. But yeah, I mean, I was happy. I was happy that in that second call out that they did actually move us around and compare. So they didn't just kind of like throw it out there and run you through the poses and send you off stage. They actually let us run through a round, and they moved me to the center of that call out, and we got to actually, present that way. So no complaints, man. I mean, I'm not I'm not making my career is not a professional bodybuilder, and I have no delusions of that. if I was going to be a good professional bodybuilder, I'd already been there by now,
Right.
competing for this long, you know. So,
Do you feel though that this was your best physique that you brought to a bodybuilding stage to date?
oh yeah, hands down, no doubt about it. When people say things like this was your best package to date, I'm like, well, yeah, that's the point, man. Like that's the whole point of doing this. I think when I'm not able to improve anymore, this is not something I'm going to be interested in doing, you know, because the work in terms of like actually getting in that condition, at least for me, is not enjoyable.
Right.
So it's like that's not exactly the reason that I would pursue it. So but this showed me a couple things. I think in my head it was one of two things going to happen. Either I was going to be up close enough to where it showed me I belong there and I can do it again and kind of work my way up a little bit, or I was going to be so far in the back that I'm like, I have no business being here and I probably should just retire from bodybuilding. So,
Okay, now before we transition, I want to ask you, because you kind of just mentioned it, but what is your, I'm assuming that you enjoy and love bodybuilding, otherwise you wouldn't have started and be doing it. But what's your ultimate in terms of why you continue to compete when, like you said, you're not making your income from being a professional bodybuilder, and you may never be a professional bodybuilder, but the question then is why continue to do this? Why continue to put yourself through all this when you're a top level coach and your business is thriving?
it's a great question. And man, I have contemplated those same questions myself many times over. And that show was a good, like, again, that was a really good gauge for me. I needed to see what happened there and kind of see what, because I'll be 33 this year, so that kind of showed me, like, that paved the path for probably the rest of my competitive career as to what I want to do. And I think that realistically, and I'm always 100% honest with myself. If anything, I'm a little hard on myself. I'm the opposite of delusional. um, I would say I'll probably take another crack at a national show, maybe Masters Nationals in a couple years and see how I fare, see how I fare at that level. At 35 and over does drop off some, but it's still very
Oh yeah.
it's still very competitive. You don't really start seeing a lot of drop off till you get to, 50 or 40s maybe. But um so I think if I don't know. I think realistically, if I did another open level national show, I could probably improve on that. Now, the question, and then at Masters, I think I could probably do really well if I continue to make little improvements. My thing is now with where my physique is at, can I do I stay? I probably have another 3 to 5 pounds of muscle. I could compete within that same division because I didn't really have to suck down to make weight for the second show too much. I kind of coasted in pretty easy because I was just lean enough. But do I stay there or heavyweight's such a huge jump is the thing, and I don't know that I have a structure. I have the structure for it as far as like my clavicle width and
Yeah.
and things like that. I'm very very broad, but do I have the time? Do I even have the ability to even eat that amount of food that and and train that way to move up a division? So I think that I'm going to kind of see off season's going good. So I'm going to kind of see where I land. So tentatively, my plan would be either A, do North Americans because that's close to me,
Mhm.
and I probably just drive there. Do North Americans, or I would do nationals because I like nationals they've got the top two guys, right? North Americans is you have to get into that overall. It's little people are like, oh, you top two pro card. I'm like, whatever, I'll take it. you know. So it would be one of those two things. And if I decide not to do that, I would probably just take a crack at Masters Nationals. If I'm very close, maybe 2 cracks at it. If I'm not top 5, then that's just kind of, there's because realistically, I'm not going to get 20% better at this point.
Right.
I've been doing it long enough and I know my body well enough. And I also have like a level of risk that I personally am willing to take within. I mean, most people know that I'm very big into functional health and I have a lot of interest in that aspect of it. So, and I know how I respond to certain things. So I just don't really see any reason to, you know, do anything too deleterious.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
Now, is some of this, Austin, because I know from just having previous conversations with you and some of the content that you share on your Instagram specifically, like core values and doing things the right way is something that is very important to you, right? And so is some of this you being a competitive bodybuilder? Is it something that kind of ties into, hey, I'm practicing what I'm preaching? I mean, is that really big to you? I know some of the most elite coaches, have never really bodybuild, or they haven't done any bodybuilding for 20, 30 years. They weren't really anything, right? But for you personally, being able to step on a stage and go through what you are telling others to go through in terms of your prep clients is you competing some of that? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And even if I didn't believe that, you can't deny it because every time I prep or every time, even right now, I posted a update yesterday, off season update. I put up these little updates, right? And I always get feedback on the, walk the walk, talk the talk, like you doing both. And it's not because I'm Phil Heath. It's just because I am practicing the things that I preach and I do follow the things that I say for myself, to the best of my ability. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That matters a lot. And also like I learn things every time. I learn things and I apply things. The whole reason I got into the functional health space is because I have my own issues.
Right.
Right. So I think that I think there's a lot to be said about that. And I think the other thing that's helpful is from a psychological standpoint, coaching and a lot of the coaches that I work with on the education side, something that we work on a lot is like understanding here's the information, here's how we fix different things, etc. But here's how you work with human beings. Like here's the psychology that goes into it because we can't just be we can't just be all be protocol coaches, like protocol coaching works really great when you have someone that's just a robot that goes from point A to point B with nothing in between. And the fact of the matter is, unless you are just getting genetic elite clients where they have a lot of like wiggle room there because so many things work, like it just doesn't it it doesn't work like that, so I think that from a psychological aspect I gain new perspective. I always say prep for me is the closest thing I'll ever get to like some what are the drug like the ayahuasca experiences and the shit like that, dude. Like prep's like an out of body experience where every time I prep I learn about things that through that really darkest days where I'm just hurting bad and I can hardly do anything. I'm like, okay, these are the areas that I can work on as a person. And these are the things that I can better apply to clients, or whoever, be a better friend or to people or whatever. So, man, if nothing else, it's a spiritual
Right.
experience.
Right. Excellent, man. Now, I want to transition into one of your clients who I've had on the podcast a couple of times. I've really enjoyed my conversations with. I like to call him King Felix, but Felix Norman. He's the 2022 overall champion of NPC North Americans. Now, I know because when he came on the podcast pre North Americans, he discussed working with you and how you know, he kind of started out as just, I think, like a health client, and then it kind of turned into, you know, being like a competitive prep client. But he had some like serious gut issues going on that you guys were able to work through. But talk about Felix a little bit in terms of what you learned as a coach working with him, bringing him into North Americans. I think he was your first overall men's open bodybuilding champion. Is that correct?
Yeah, for a national show. Yep.
Okay. And so just what did you learn working with Felix during that prep for North Americans? And then what are you guys kind of working on in terms of Felix's off season at this point?
Yeah, so Felix did come in as he was a bodybuilder, but he hadn't competed in a while at that point when we started. And um, Felix is a great example of what happens when you take someone with, you know, good to great bodybuilding genetics and you also get his body to function properly.
Right.
And, you know, at that time, I don't know, probably 2018 ish. I'm guessing 2019. I was really like starting to work with more bodybuilders on functional health issues also, and not just, you know, women all the time. Because I think that, well, I know that in the bodybuilding space, there's a huge need for this. You know, and males are going to have different issues than females. You know, men eat a lot more food, so digestive issues. Granted, they're different than female digestive issues, but they're rampant everywhere, right? You know, one of the things that if you saw Felix on stage was he was obviously super heavyweight, but his midsection was so tight and flat that it was almost concaved when he came out on stage, and people were commenting on him like, yeah, he was peeled, but this was because we fixed his digestion. You know, he wasn't bloated. And so, you know, so things like that, I'm really out trying to spread the word on the value of that to bodybuilders, and luckily that reach is expanding. But yeah, so once we started and really started fixing his, you know, digestion, cleaning up his routine, getting everything kind of more standardized, and Felix thrives on routine, everything responded better. You know, it was getting twice the response from half of the stimulus, right? So that gives you a lot of room to work with, because also longevity is important in bodybuilding, unless you again are like the ultra elite genetics where you can just turn pro and compete for a few years and you're out. He's not that. He's good. I mean, he's not quite that though, you know, genetically. So, you know, optimizing all those things in order for us to, you know, extend, have a nice long career, get him into the pro ranks. We want to compete next year, so 2024 is when we're planning on doing a debut. He's making great progress right now. He's he's about 300 pounds and like has visible, you know, visible glutes and lines everywhere, and he's pretty lean. So, and he's under 6 foot tall. So, you know, he's, you know, a big guy for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, with him, I think that it just gave me even more practice applying those functional health practices to bigger people, right? So now I have quite a few bigger people. I should have, you know, a good handful of open bodybuilders at North Americans again this year, at least a couple. You know, because I consider open bodybuilding like the pinnacle of, you know, the sport. It is, it takes the longest to get there. It's the hardest to compete in. Classic physique's very competitive too, but when you're getting up into like higher weight classes of open bodybuilding, that's the pinnacle, right? So it gave me some more practice there and really fine tuning those processes in with him. And then that went into his prep and then also into his off seasons where we're able to, you know, like digest food better. So of course, grow more efficiently, respond better to things, because really the limiting factors for a lot of men in their off seasons is just they can't eat enough to get where they need to go. And then, or they feel so shitty and ran down and sluggish that they can't train as effectively as they want. It disrupts their sleep. like all these things. And of course it just snowballs from there. So yeah, he's doing great. He's if I had 50 more clients just like that, it'd be it'd be a good day.
For sure. Now, with him getting that overall at North Americans, for you as a coach, I mean, that's obviously not that you needed your resume to be padded more or built more, but in terms of a coach who coaches competitors, that's a huge feather in the cap. Just like, when you get somebody to turn pro or, have an IFBB pro win a pro show or get to the Olympia, having somebody win an overall, especially an open men's bodybuilding overall pro qualifier like North Americans, Nationals, USA is like, that's a resume builder. That's a feather in the cap. Did you take a few minutes, Austin, out of your busy life to just kind of soak all of that in and appreciate that, or were you just kind of on to the next thing?
I tried to do both at the same time.
Yeah, right. Of course, of course.
I was very proud of him. But I'll tell you, man, like I'm proud of all my competitors, no matter, and I'm proud of all my clients. I've always part of that like ethical thing and that the standard that you talked about is that everyone pays my bills. So, you know, and Felix would tell you this, and he, like I'm going to treat him and give him what he needs, but I'm also going to give my soccer mom that has, digestive issues the same level of care, right? Because again, at the end of the day, it is a business. I think customer service is important, but yeah, we definitely enjoyed that experience. I mean, pretty much ticked all the boxes, super heavyweight, men's open overall, and then went into nationals and had another pro at nationals in my wellness, one of my wellness competitors too. So that was a good year. So hopefully this year we can add a couple more.
Yeah, for sure, man. Okay. Now I want to transition into a little bit more specific coaching talk and business talk and things like that. Now, integrated muscle and health, that's your business, that's your coaching business, that's kind of your brand. I know we talked a little bit about this in terms of our first conversation on the podcast, but integrated muscle and health, like if you could sum that up, coaching business and your philosophy, you could sum that up in like, a sentence or two. Do that for us, please. And then talk a little bit more about this functional health and how your coaching and your business mindset and philosophy is maybe quite a bit different than what's out there current day.
Sure. So I have a slogan. I have a slogan that I kind of use with the company, and it reads something like, integrated muscle and health, a dynamic and passionate approach to physique enhancement and health. And I think that really does sum it up because there's some important words in there. Passion, we've talked about standards and ethics and things like that. Dynamic, dynamic is evolving and changing and ebbs and flows. And and like I said, not just being a protocol coach, not just treating. I think that most good coaches are not one size fits all, but I think that the ability to really, really, really read a situation and be open-minded and not stuck in one pattern of doing things is difficult because when you've coached repetitively over and over and over and you've had success, you're going to probably keep doing what made you successful, right? And I think that what happens a lot of the time with people when they get such a large resume and a roster is we see a lot of success on Instagram and Facebook and social media, but we're not seeing they have so many clients that we're not seeing all the drop-offs and we're not seeing all the things that are not working. So for me, making sure that I am always remaining dynamic and that I'm not afraid to swallow my ego and change something. And if that's maybe because the client tells me something, a piece of feedback, I need to take that into perspective. Or if it's like, something I'm doing just not working, I need to be willing to adjust and pivot on that. So that's really the company. I think doing things, and another slogan for me would just be like making complex things simple. One of the things I've really tried to fine tune over the years is we have so much information out there now. So I'm trying to take all of these complex topics in functional health and, performance enhancement, whatever it might be, and break it down into digestible information for the clients and for the coaches that I help. So that's important.
Hmm. Now, I know recently within, I don't know, I think it was actually at the beginning of the year, he told me when I brought him back on the podcast, but Matt Berzicott joined kind of your team in terms of a coach for integrated muscle and health. And him and I talked about you and talked about him making that move or that transition. From your perspective, why did you want to have Matt as a part of your coaching team, Austin?
Yeah, sure. So I I'll be the first to say I had a really difficult time even ever adding coaches to my team. I had people telling me to do it it was long overdue. So we'll say that first because particular. I'm particular in terms of, you know, surrounding myself with a very, very small niche group of good people. So I had a difficult time, but ultimately I first added my female coach, Sonia, who's fantastic. And then I wanted a male coach. And I also wanted a male coach that was well versed and had a lot of experience in men and bodybuilding, right? And Matt fit the bill for a few reasons because he does have a lot of experience. He had been mentoring with me already. And, I was really getting him dialed in on the functional side. He was learning how to like apply that digestion, hormone stuff to his clients, and I just like him as a person. And I think that that was what really jumped out at me because there's probably other people that I could find that were qualified from a knowledge base, but I think as from a from on the moral and ethical side of things, he really really stood out to me. Every conversation we had on our calls was really good, and when I got to that point, he was one of the first people that popped in my head. So it was kind of an easy decision.
Right. Talk a little bit about more in detail, Austin, some of the like these like ethical values and stuff that we kind of keep talking about or mentioning in passing as we're asking other questions and sharing. What's the deal with having these values? Like, where does this come from for you personally? Why is it important to you to have values not only in your own personal life but within your business? Like, just expound on that because we don't really talk about that, especially in the bodybuilding community, because there's just a lot of wackiness and it's kind of the wild west in every sense of the word. So let's talk
Yeah.
values. Like, what are some of your personal values and why is it important to instill that within your coaching business?
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's a it's an interesting topic. I'm trying to think back of where there was a point that maybe it clicked for me, but I think really it was more of like an accumulated thing over time where I was just seeing is that some people that are listening that maybe don't know, I've been doing this for long enough to where I've seen a lot of people come and go as coaches and kind of seen the different evolutions where I've seen the forums, I've seen the where coaching started to blow up, I've seen when bikini was introduced and men's physique, and like because before the competitive pool was smaller because there was so many less divisions, so many fewer divisions. But kind of fast forward, and I think that I just was just kind of confused at times about why so many people were settling for coaching and paying people that didn't seem to care that much about the fact that people were spending their hard-earned money on them. Now this is a business again, so like it's not like you're handing stuff out for free, and if you're really good you should be paid as such. But I'm like, why is it taking 2 or 3 days for people to respond? Why is like, what are all these things? And there was so much drama, and I decided that I just didn't want to be part of that. So that kind of escalated into like, I can offer something better to people, right? And I think really the key thing to keep in mind here is you're going to attract what you put out there. So when you're interacting with clients, when you're posting on social media, when you're at a competition, like whatever it is, a seminar or whatever. And I've noticed this with a lot of the client, coaches that I help, is that people can get clients if they're good at marketing or if they've had success, but they don't always get the types of clients that they want or that they jive with. And that's because maybe the information that they put out or the way they portray themselves on social media is kind of inaccurate. They portray something very glamorous or very whatever it is. You know what I'm talking about. It could be something like, I've met all these people. Like, it's a lot of the time it's a facade, right? And what you see is not what you get, type of thing. But I want it to be that. I want to be like, here's what I am, here's what I stand for, this is what you get. That's not to say that every single person's gonna like the way that I do things. That's okay. Those probably aren't people that are gonna jive with me well as anyhow. So like, I was like, okay, well, I started to notice the more authentic I was, the more I was attracting people that fit my mold,
Hmm.
right? And it wasn't, so my niche was never like, I want to be all IFBB pros, or I want to have all bikini competitors, or all this or that. It was just like, I want all good people.
Mhm. Right. Right.
Because and I think that over the years, that's where that developed and kind of come out. And I know now it's like a thing and people kind of comment on it, and that I've remained kind of true. And unfortunately, there's just like not a lot of that
Mhm.
anymore. It's just very, they just put out whatever's going to bring in the clicks.
Yeah. Just going for the fast money, I think, right? I mean, that's really what it is. I mean, you see it in every industry. You've got all kinds of different people, obviously, in different industries, but a lot of the times, Austin, I think it's just people that are chasing the green. They're chasing the money, and it's at all costs. It's at all expenses. And the thing is, I've been doing this podcast now for quite a while, and we're at episode 300. This will be
Oh,
301.
nice.
Had, I mean, literally hundreds of conversations with athletes and coaches. It's just there's just so much facade, and there's just so much fake, and there's just so much like what are you doing, man? Like, you are
Right.
literally putting people's lives, especially when we're talking about the enhanced bodybuilding side of things, like you are taking somebody's life, and you are going to alter their life possibly forever. And I mean, there's a huge weight and responsibility as a coach, when you start getting into the enhanced side of things. I mean, right?
Yeah, I think there's a huge responsibility there. I think there's a huge responsibility if you're dealing with functional health and people that are sick, like they have problems, they're sick, right? I think there's a huge responsibility. I think there's a huge responsibility when anyone takes money from their bank account and pays you. Now, again, I say that I don't want that to sound like, I don't want a bunch of people DMing me, but for like free coaching, because I'm not doing that. But this isn't like a charity, but at the same time, you know, it is something where you should be delivering a certain level of, being personable, and, you know, just being a decent person. Maybe it's a Midwest thing. Maybe it's like a Midwesterner thing. And that's just how I was raised. My parents weren't into fitness. I didn't have anyone in my family into fitness, but they were business owners.
Yeah.
And I did see the underlying theme I saw was just treating people right. And my dad told me one thing, might have been my dad or my grandfather, I can't recall for sure, but they said, what's good for people is good for business.
Mm.
And that kind of stuck with me. Like you said, making money. I'm gonna tell you, you can make plenty of money being a good person.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a different path. It's a different path to get there, but I'll tell you, it's maybe a longer path, but it's a path of far less resistance, a path of far less drama, and a path where I can lay my head on the pillow at night and feel a heck of a lot better about it.
Hmm. Right. I love that. That's a great point with your parents being business owners. My parents were entrepreneurs and business owners, and just growing up in that environment, even though, you know, my dad, he's still into antiques. My mom had a framing store. I could care less about antiques. I could care less about framing. But growing up in that environment, just because you're in that environment, seeing how your dad interacts with his customers, how your mom interacts with her customers, I glean so much, right? So that's a great takeaway. Great you know, point there, Austin. Okay, we're gonna wrap it up. I know you got a lot going on still for today. You mentioned earlier in terms of, you know, when you were in your prep and then obviously taking care of your coaching clients, you had to manage stress. So just giving the listeners and the viewers some takeaways. Maybe they're in prep right now. They're going to get ready to go into prep later this year. What are some ways that we can manage stress for ourselves if we are in prep or about to be in prep?
Best thing you can do, most important thing in my opinion, is have all of those things established before you start. You know, prep should be, there shouldn't be this switch that flips where your whole life changes when you start prep. It's if you're going to compete, then you should have this routine and this repetition and this structure in play beforehand. Whether that's, so if you are going to compete or you're in the beginning stages of your prep, look around. What are your weakest links? Maybe it's that you don't have a very good schedule in terms of when you get up and when you go to bed, or whatever. It could be so many different things. Take note of that, fix those things as early as possible, because it's going to be way easier to fix those things now than it is when you're 6 weeks out and everything's in shambles. You know, so for me, having all that groundwork and foundation when things got really, really hard, I had my schedule. I knew what workload I could handle. You know, I got up at this time. I went to bed at this time, you know, for the most part. I had this routine, so on and so forth. And pays dividends. You know, really the only thing that changes when you start prep is like you eat a different amount of food and you might do some cardio, but really you're not feeling any different, at least until, you know, much further into it. You shouldn't be.
Right.
So, you know, that's probably my first and biggest piece of advice for people, is that. And the second thing, if I'm going to give two pieces of advice, the second thing is that don't succumb to the victim mentality when it starts getting hard. That's really difficult because, man, you're going to have days where you go to work and none of the people around you have any clue about bodybuilding or anything else, and your parents don't support you and your friends don't support you, and because they just don't know. Maybe it's not a malicious thing, they just don't understand, you know, and you don't have maybe any of that around you. And so it's really easy to feel sorry for yourself when you're, you know, feeling rough. And so not succumbing to that victim mentality, you know, realizing that those bad days matter, you know, keeping it together and salvaging what you can on those bad days is going to add up in the long run when it comes time, you know, to get on stage. You know, if you do screw up, heaven forbid, and you know, you go binge on some cookies or whatever the heck happens to you, you know, getting back on track and understanding, you know, big picture. So, you know, don't be a victim and have a good routine. Make sure everything's nailed down, write stuff down. For me, it's in a planner. I'm old school when it comes to that because I look at my phone too much anyhow. So I'm like pen and paper, you know. So, you know, do what you got to do when it comes to structure. That's important.
Amen. All right. Okay. So I want to just ask you, kind of going back to business again, kind of trying to glean just some takeaways from you, and then we'll close it out here, Austin. In terms of your business, let's just get it to the point where it's just like over the last year or two, okay? Because obviously you've been in business for a long time, but over the last year or two, what has been like the biggest system that you've implemented within your business that has helped propel your business forward? And if there's more than one, please feel free to share, but is there anything that kind of pops up when I ask that question?
Yeah, there is one. And this has probably been one of the most helpful things in terms of keeping that routine and efficiency and what have you, is that when I start with new clients, whether it be coaches for education or coaching clients, is that I really try to address bad habits and structure right out of the gate. So things like, not updating on time, not providing information, whatever, negativity, even sometimes just mindset stuff with people. Maybe it's they're very structured, but their perspective towards things is poor, right? It's much easier to like set the precedent early on in that coaching relationship than it is 3 months in when they're kind of just doing the same stuff over and over again. So for me, that's been the biggest thing because people don't realize, when I was having this conversation with one of my coaches the other day about their day, and they're just kind of too all over the place. People were just kind of arbitrarily sending stuff here and there. I'm like, man, you need to kind of tighten this structure down. Next thing you know, you're saving 2 hours a day, you're saving 14 hours a week. Man, that changes the whole course of how many people you can work with or what level of service you can provide to the people you're already working with, your own mental sanity, like all these things. So having those conversations up front with people and getting better at just being honest and nipping those things right out of the gate has been the most helpful thing for me in the last year or two.
Excellent. Cool. All right, Austin. I think that's a great place to end it, man. I just want to say thank you again for coming on, kind of catching us up to speed with you're competing last year and letting us know a little bit about Felix and just talking some life and business. I really appreciate it, man. Before I do a quick outro and let you go, if people want to connect with you, where can they connect with you? If people want coaching and all the things, Austin Stout, Integrated Muscle and Health, where can they go? If you have any final thoughts or final words you want to leave with us, platform's yours, Austin.
Sure. So easiest ways, Austin Stout on Facebook, Austin ST8 on Instagram. I have a nice little link tree in the bio, so that has links to, different social medias. My email is in the bio for both of those. So that's best for anything coaching, education, classes, whatever. That's the way to get a hold of me. If you want to follow information, social media, YouTube, it's all there.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Austin. I'll do a quick outro and I'll let you go. Okay.
Yep.
All right. All of you who are tuning into another episode of Behind the Muscle podcast, I just want to say thank you so very much. If you guys have not done so already, please make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube in regards to Behind the Muscle podcast. And then please take this episode with Austin, share it on your Instagram stories. Make sure you tag Austin, tag Behind the Muscle podcast so that we know that you listened specifically to this episode and found great value in it, in which I know you did. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.